All right. Good morning, good afternoon, folks. Thank you all so much for taking your time to be with us this afternoon. In an effort to start, most importantly, in a good way, we have Elder Lorraine Nitro from Punta Quichin First Nation, all the way from Old Crow, on the phone with us to start us with an opening prayer and to get us going. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Elder Nitro, and we'll get started today. Over to you, Lorraine.
Thank you, Curtis Masik Cho, for this wonderful opportunity to join you in prayer this morning. I really appreciate it. And in my prayer, I usually say my prayer in the Gutchin language and just acknowledging our knowledge keepers, our youth, our leaders, our men and women in each of our communities. And also to acknowledge each of our traditional territories where we continue to do our work, and also just give thanks for today. Our work is really important, and what we do in our communities and on behalf of our serving our people for protection of our lands, our animals, and our waters for all future generations. And also like to acknowledge our families who always support us in the work that we do. We live in challenging times with the pandemic that we're in, and many of our loved ones and our relatives and our friends, people are sick with the COVID-19, and we face so many challenges within our respective regions. And it's so important for us to make sure that our voices are on the forefront of the work that we do. And you know, we're experiencing sometimes that governments don't listen to us. And yet we have to continue. We've got to be persistent, and we have to continue to make sure that our voices are heard, and just continue to knock on those doors. And we'll give thanks for today, and I'll ask Creator to bring us to this call with a good mind, with a good spirit, and a good heart. So with that, I'll say the prayer in my language. Agwadache kakuti, ju hakudidich uinli, juk drin queenzi hachida ai enjet masi chono jinu agwadat. Agwadat juk drin, the enjet chitnili kat, the enjet chanjo nili kat, the enjet ejit kat, that train jo that inji kat, the kike it gujit, sak agwa that juk drin ok ogana in, agwa that nan enjit gujit agwa in, I gujit sak enjit masi chono jinu, ninli gujit jitit idia, ninli gujit guhea, agwa that Yeno T2 kat Queen Z nan aganati. I gujit takjuk drin go gutrit gujit yen to genjit ti gutrit juk drin dia in liga visli. Juk drin di family nitin digin uk akwadat go ogana in. Jeet iknin I chan I kaikit takunat u Canada gujit gonli agwa that I gujit sak agwa that nori gujit jitti juk drin di devego I gahitan dai kwa agwa that nan rihtien jit I inli nan rihtien jit Kanadan IISAAK Agwadat Height Cho Noji Nu Masi Cho Agwadat Masi Cho. Thank you.
Masi, Elder Nitro, for your wonderful words. So lucky to just spent a number of years working with Elder Nitro and supporting their efforts to protect the porcupine caribou herd in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and just really a pleasure to have you with us and value the time spent with you learning. So thank you so much. Just a few housekeeping items for you all. As we get started, I just want to note that today's session will take place in English, but for those of you who would like to listen in French, if you could please click on the button at the bottom of your screen. It's a globe button at the bottom, and you can select the French translation. If your preferred language for breakout groups is French, would ask that you add an asterisk in front of your name. And if you're not already seeing that, or if it's not already seeing one ahead of your name, and you don't know how to rename yourself through the Zoom platform, please make a note in the chat, and we can help to do this for you. A second note, as before we get going, to note for all that the dialogue today is going to be recorded for the benefit of First Nations participants who are unable to attend and who may like to participate in future sessions, and would like to begin before we get started, just to introduce you all to the team that's made this session and the future sessions possible. And if you'd like to select speaker view instead of gallery view on your screens, you'll be able to see all the core members of the planning team as they pop up on my screen as well. So introduce you to Eli Enns, Zoe Mager, Monica Shore, and myself, of course, Curtis Skur. All folks, Monica, Eli, and Zoe, as well as Kelly Poirier, who's our graphic facilitation, will be providing graphic facilitation today, all from IISAAK OLAM Foundation and White Raven Consulting. And just take a few minutes, I guess, to introduce myself to you all as we get into the session. My name is Curtis Skur. I'm the Director of Environment with the Assembly of First Nations, Mohawk from Tyendinaga Nation in Southern Ontario, Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte Turtle Clan, and really happy to finally be here with you all today. We spent so much time preparing and looking forward to sharing some space with you, and really happy that we finally come here to see all your faces, to meet some new faces, and see some folks that are familiar. Really looking forward to the afternoon. With that, I would like to hand it over to Eli to introduce himself, and then we'll get on our way into the session. So over to you, Eli.
Thanks, Curtis. Yeah, my name's Eli Enns. I'm from Tlaoquiit First Nation on the west coast of Vancouver Island on my father's side of my family, and St. Boniface, Winnipeg, Manitoba on my mom's side of my family. The IISAAK OLAM Foundation is an Indigenous non-governmental organization that is focused on knowledge mobilization and capacity development for the protection, conservation, and promotion of biocultural diversity. So we look at that intersection between biological diversity and cultural and linguistic diversity, and look at a variety of programs and projects to support capacity development and knowledge mobilization for that, towards that end. The IISAAK OLAM Foundation, has been supporting the Assembly of First Nations education sector for quite a few years now in a variety of ways, and we're looking forward to working with all of you to strengthen our collective voice for species at risk. So over to Kelly.
Uklama chi isamka sisha aksu Mamasmakit MT Kelly Foxcroft Poirier. Histak Shikla Tsumaas. Uhukwa Umiksu Deb Foxcroft. Uhukwa Nuiksu Mike Foxcroft. Hukwita Naniksu James Oish Jan Gallic. Oish Earl Foxcroft. Uhukwa Yukwitsu Tatsimka Don Foxcroft. Hita Mamuk White Raven Consulting. My name is Kelly Foxcroft Poirier. I am calling in from the unceded territory of Tsishat. That is, I introduce myself as a Tsishat woman, one of the 14 New Channels Nations. My pronouns are she, her, but also welcoming the full spectrum of they and the beautiful way humans show up. And really happy to come and share space with you as a graphic recorder, graphic facilitator. So I am playing the role of being a harvester and in the deep witnessing space that we see in so much of our good work as Indigenous people, and really centering the practice that all of our most important work and language from our constitutions and our treaties were expressed as art, and have always been our most important ideas and language have been expressed in our language and in ceremony, in story, and through artwork. And so Kleko, Shukshikleits, you've done a good thing. Thank you for allowing me to honor your work and your words through this chart, which you will get at the end of these sessions. Chu, Kleko, Kleko. Just a little bit of what we are going to be in today, and inviting you, I'm speaking in this piece. So the flow of our time together, just a little map to help us wayfind how our time will be used. Thank you so much, Elder Lorraine, for the ceremonial welcome and for speaking your language in. I know the ancestors can hear us in our good work today of being good ancestors. We will hear a little bit of an introduction and some really great framing from our the folks that are holding the session. We will talk a little bit about the dialogues and what we will be in today in terms of being an inquiry, sharing, building network and interconnection. We'll talk a little bit about principles, as well as heading into open dialogue to be in good sharing and good telling and listening space with one another. Can't wait to hear the wisdom of so many of the folks that have joined us today. I will offer back the visual reflections of some things that I heard and honoring those words. We will hear a little bit about next steps and then head in some good closing space. We were open so beautifully. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we say when we're finished in these lands, we say choo.
Thank you so much, Kelly. So my name is Zoe Mager. I work with the IISAAK OLAM Foundation. And I would just like to invite everyone who's here today to use the chat. Everyone's been introducing themselves, and those who are just joining, please feel free to introduce yourself and where you're from. And it's a good opportunity to interact, or if you have questions on the spot, feel free to throw them in there as well. Myself and Chris from Encore will be also here as your tech support. You always have the option to either message everyone or to specifically find someone to message. So you can get in touch with us, and we'll do our best to help everyone out and make sure that we can communicate as best we can over this platform. So in today's session, we'll be sharing some really important context with you. As we've kind of indicated, this is the beginning of this is not a one-off. This is the beginning of what we hope to be an ongoing dialogue. And there's been really amazing feedback in the sense of incredible registration for these sessions. So we're definitely getting a sense that there's the appetite for it. So we're also aware that, Zoom has its benefits and limitations, but we're going to do our best to make this session as interactive as possible. So we will have some polls coming up throughout the session to gain your feedback, and we will have a few small group discussions. Yeah, and I will turn it over to Curtis for next pieces.
Thanks so much, Zoe, and to you all. Wonderful team, folks working behind the scenes and with you today, and hopes of really kind of supporting an important dialogue with you all. So really appreciative of their time, their efforts, and their presence here with us all. We'll be using, as Zoe mentioned, a polling tool called Mentimeter, which is more for visual, more to provide a visual response and allowing for different types of answers from the polls today. So our first question for this afternoon, to kind of get us familiar with this polling, our first question is very simple. How did you hear about today's dialogue? And if you can follow the link there, the Mentimeter link, and just click the link in the chat box that's been shared, and we'll take a few minutes and we'll see the responses come as we go. So just a few minutes for you all to answer and become familiar with the Mentimeter polling application.
And if anyone's having an issue with the Mentimeter, please feel free to just respond in the chat if you're comfortable, or contact myself.
If we, it's Rick Beaver call. Can you hear me?
Hi, Rick.
Yes, hi. When we click on the little circles with the Mentimeter, nothing happens. Is there a technique I'm missing there?
Good point. No, if you click on your choice and then submit, then come on back to the Zoom. We will now start sharing.
Zoe, you might need to share the link again. I think it might have been the response link that was posted. Let's just make sure that it's the one that has the answer. This is a good test for everybody here, as we have to navigate kind of leaving and returning to the meeting. So nobody's wrong there. Here, let's try this. No, it seems to be the same link. I'm going to test it myself. Some people are able to. You can see the results coming in. So feel free to just put your answers in the chat as a simple way to navigate any tech issues you may be experiencing through the link. Apologies.
But just to be clear, when you do answer, the responses won't pop up on your individual screen. So thanks for clarifying that. We missed that piece.
Right. Yes.
I think what might have been Scott Jeremy here. I think what might have been happening is people, including myself, were clicking on the screen that was shared instead of clicking the link and then going to the.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, that was just to show what it would look like. Okay, there we go. Mystery solved. Thanks, Scott.
We're all learning this together. So thanks everyone for your patience.
All right, let's give it another 10 seconds and then over to Curtis, back to Curtis. This is great information. Really fun to see the graph fill itself out. So it looks like a lot of you learned about this through your place of work and the AFN, and that's wonderful. I'm glad that the word gets around.
All right, wonderful. Thank you all for your patience and for running through that. As Zoe mentioned, there'll be a few more opportunities in and amongst the dialogue today, and as we come back and forth from breakout to partake in a few more additional polls and really get some of your feedback from the conversations. The goal, of course, is to create a space for us to share, to listen, and to learn, and to be able to focus and listen attentively. So we'll be looking at those polls to be using them when we come back out of breakout session primarily. So to get into today's objectives and making our way through, just important to note that today's session has been designed with 3 primary objectives in mind. First and foremost, and most importantly, is to create a space that we consider at this particular point in time that does not exist. And for First Nations to share knowledge, experience, and information about species at risk with one another. To have you all here as peers to be sharing and learning from your expertise and your experiences. And that's the second objective. So sharing and learning all of the approaches, your recommendations as it relates to species at risk monitoring, management, conservation, and recovery. And beyond that, really looking to have you all share what you're comfortable with and really just to enjoy the space with so many others that are doing such good work. And finally, to gauge interest in connecting existing networks and initiatives that you're all involved in through your participation in continued dialogues and gatherings over the coming months and into the next few years. Really build a community of understanding all the good work that's occurring and having an opportunity for you all to share with one another. Those are our three primary objectives. And sort of building on that as we go forward. I'm really wanting to bring you all sort of to the space that we find ourselves today and reflect a bit on how we've gotten here. And so this really kind of touches back to what many of you may be familiar with as what was called the First Nations, the AFN National Climate Gathering, which occurred a year ago, almost to the day, in March 2020 in Whitehorse, Yukon, the first national climate gathering of its kind hosted by the AFN. And shortly after that gathering, of course, as we all know, restrictions and challenges and life as we know it changed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So looking back to and reflecting on that session in March of 2020, we were able to provide a dialogue session there that spoke to very much this topic and species at risk and leadership from First Nations in this regard, as it related to what's been known and become to be known as the Pan-Canadian approach to species at risk conservation. This work, of course, has been Canada's effort. The Pan-Canadian approach has been Canada's effort to transition species at risk management from single species to a multi-species approach. Important to note that this was introduced in 2019, the Pan-Canadian approach, but was created without the input of Indigenous peoples, without the input of First Nations, and important for us to be aware of that, but certainly not to allow our conversations to be limited by that effort, and more importantly, focus on concerns and priorities and the experiences of yourselves and others, and sort of setting a course forward for species at risk conservation in Canada. So that's the importance and the hope of creating this space. The work that we've embarked upon over the last number of years has been through what's called the Indigenous Partnerships Initiative in collaboration with Environment and Climate Change Canada. But our plan as we go forward is really to look at creating an additional 4 to 5, perhaps more SAR sessions, much like this, over the coming years to inform our work as First Nations, to build our connections and our capacity to raise awareness about your approaches, about the work that you're doing at the federal level, to increase awareness and inclusion of that important feedback and the important work to help to inform SAR conservation management nationally and regionally to the extent possible. And it's important for us to engage in this space, as I say, sort of with our eyes wide open in that sense. And so to name some of, as we'll call them or come to be known, the elephants in the room, but creating space to really focus on the positives of this work, on the potential and the opportunities that come from this work, and to make meaningful change together. And so with that, I'm going to hand things over to my brother Eli Enns to walk us through and to share with us some thoughts on what those elephants are, and continue to set the context and get us into the dialogue. So with that, I'll hand it over to Eli.
Awesome, thanks. Thanks, Curtis. Yeah, I think the subject of species at risk is very emotional, a very intimate conversation for our people across Canada, and recognizing first and foremost the elders that have been and Lorraine being one of those. Thank you, Lorraine, for opening us up. And I've learned so much from Lorraine about the porcupine caribou herd and the ongoing concerns that the Gwich'in people have up in the Yukon. And right across Canada, when I meet with elders, first and foremost, they are concerned about cultural keystone species, and hearing from the elders firsthand in their lived experience in observing the decline of biological diversity in the environment. And now, of course, Western science in recent decades has been able to affect government and governance decisions around species at risk and addressing the broader biological crisis, biological diversity crisis happening in the world around us. So we want to, just acknowledge upfront that in Canada, region after region across this country has seen epic failures of biological diversity directly related to bad practices that were coming in with the so-called settling of the West. So we acknowledge that elephant in the room, that things such as the Great Plow Up and the destruction of bison herds in the prairies, the abuse of fisheries in coastal regions, the abuse of caribou herds. Our elders have seen that firsthand and have been warning us about the dangers of not addressing it. And so that's an elephant in the room that we need to face, and that we take as a prerequisite understanding that that the state of health and well-being on the land has gone down. And this is also why the IISAAK OLAM Foundation focuses in on biocultural diversity, because globally around the world, science has confirmed what our elders have been saying for many decades, is that there is a connection between language, culture, and the health of the environment. The decline of species globally has paralleled the decline of languages that are being spoken, cultures that are being lost. And so we recognize that the elder societies, the indigenous societies of North America, had some things figured out. And part of fulfilling our obligations to the past and future ancestors is about answering the call that now is being the call that is coming from the great grandchildren of the newcomers. And I want to say that the governments, the Canadian, provincial, and international governments are considered to be young societies. They are, Canada celebrated 150 years of Confederation not long ago. And this we see as an adolescent society, a young society. And when you're a teenager, sometimes you act in a way that's destructive to yourself and to others. And so that we recognize that now is the time that the elders predicted would happen, that the great grandchildren of the newcomers will come and ask us for guidance and for help. And they have their goals. Like Curtis said, they came up with an entire strategy on species at risk that didn't involve Indigenous perspectives. The United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity came up with the 20 Aichi targets that Canada has been also trying to implement domestically here in Canada. But we encourage all of our nations to have our own goals and have our own plans and our own strategies. And that through supporting and working with Canada and certain provinces that want to work collaboratively, that we are, exercising the original vision peace and friendship, which the ancestors and the elders had desired for our people, to have a life of peace and friendship with the newcomers and peaceful coexistence. But that a requirement to do that is to treat that what has been provided by the Creator, by Mother Nature or Mother Earth, or however you want to think of that creative energy, that which has been provided with respect. And so that's a big part of what we're talking about here. And we want to acknowledge also that that in terms of the practical application of constitutional law in Canada, and I'm sure, I mean, anyone who's working for a First Nation or with Indigenous governments in Canada, you have to at least have a peripheral understanding of constitutional law. And so I'm sure many of you are already semi-fluent in the language of Section 35 and so on and so forth. But recognizing that the provincial governments do not have the right to, they have the right to infringe upon Aboriginal rights, but they do not have the right to extinguish Aboriginal rights. And I want to make a special acknowledgement of this point, because it is the provincial governments that have made, in many cases, such bad decisions around resource management, environmental governance, such bad choice around those things that has led to the state of biodiversity crisis that we have today. And we get caught up in the middle of that with the devolution of the state, the creation of the provinces of Alberta, for example, Saskatchewan, and majority of Manitoba after the postage stamp province situation, that the Crown lands were not transferred in a way that was constitutionally sound. In other words, not only have governments been violating natural and Indigenous law in getting to where we are today in the state of crisis for biodiversity, but they have also been violating their own constitutional law. That's the punchline. We know that they have violated the Royal Proclamation of 1763. They know that they have unnecessarily and unduly infringed upon Aboriginal rights to hunt and fish by pushing many of those cultural keystone species to the brink of extinction. So these are some things, the elephants in the room, that we want to highlight, that these are things that your team that is serving you and moving this dialogue forward nationally, that we are aware of these things, that we take it as a given, as our starting point for understanding how we need to work with the Canadian government and provinces to address the species at risk phenomenon. So I think those were all the elephants in the room. And the whole idea here with this part of the exercise is to sort of state those things up front, say, okay, that is the unfortunate reality that we have to operate in, that's our starting point. Let's not get focused on the negativity. Let's not get stuck in it. Now let's move ahead with a solutions-based approach. Of course, the key part of any problem-solving exercise and coming up with sound and effective solutions is understanding and framing the problem well. And I think that that we likely could agree on this call that a part of that problem and how we got here was the interruption and interference of Indigenous governance of the land. And so the whole dialogue of reconciliation is not just limited to Crown Indigenous societal reconciliation. We talk about reconciliation between humanity and the rest of creation, or the other species that we have co-evolved with over so many thousands of years. And that reconciliation, as was famously quoted in the TRC that reconciliation between Crown and Indigenous peoples can never happen until there's reconciliation with the land. And so it's through this initiative and others that we're seeking to action that type of reconciliation. So now with that, now that we've named the elephants in the room, now back over to Kelly to provide some light to silver lining and such.
Thank you for helping us walk the foundation of truth so that we can all move into wise action. And thinking about not silver lining, but teachings of balance and relational practice with our plant, animal, fire, water relatives. And that is what we've always done. And so turning towards the light seems appropriate, being that we're going to honor the season we're in, which is the vernal equinox just took place, which is a balance, a time of balance of light and dark, you know. So appropriate, we're coming into this place of the very dark winter and, you know, reflecting on these things that we've inherited and then moving and shifting towards a strength-based approach where we can operate as Indigenous First Nations people, as we always have, from a place of principles and values, because from there, those are our strengths and we will never go wrong, especially with our collective wisdom. So naming a few growing principles that were considered with care to center in this work is inviting us into a space of possibility. Curtis talked about the creation, the imaginative space, that we haven't created a space for Indigenous people by Indigenous people in this dialogue. And so really welcoming respectfully and with humility all that is possible. We are a growing community. This is the start of a much longer, much broader conversation. So inviting all to grow alongside each other and with us. We have inherited a lot of things that aren't working for us, but we have also, and do not ever forget how we've inherited so much deep ancestral wisdom that can transmute, that is transformative, of taking, you know, stuff that is not working and being able to bring it into the light with wisdom, with teachings, with values, and with guidance. And so with that, I'm wanting to also invite us to co-create, because we're only as good as what our work is together. We are always better together. And in reflecting on principles, thinking about the way they anchor our practice, thinking about the way they keep us in a good way and invite this dialogic and relational way of being that our people have excelled at and will continue to. So principles, wanting to hear from you and help us grow even more principles to help grow this work, do this work well today. So we are going to try to do another Mentimeter that allows you to submit a few principles that are at the top of your heart and the top of your mind, because this is not just head work, this is also heart work, as Eli also named. So making that connection and inviting a few principles from each of you that are important for you in that good work. So Zoe has kindly placed in the chat a link. If everyone can go to that chat and click on the link and take a few minutes to provide some insight, collective wisdom, and space for us all to be in principles together and to start in a good way that's been named by each of us. So just a few minutes to add and be in good generosity and reciprocity. Music. I'll give you some music while we get our polling going. So just offering a few of the principles that folks have input. Thank you so much, Zoe, for screen sharing those for us. Respect and accountability. Sovereign, Indigenous people are sovereign. The institution of love for the earth, philosophies in our educational system, identification of where the most serious impacts have come from and identifying them, increasing the, I can't read the whole thing, but I'm really, clarity and our collective voices. Kindness, reciprocity, listening, centered on Indigenous values. Not only respecting and protecting the lands and water where species live, but also where suitable habitats could potentially develop. The more you give, the wealthier you are. Just looking in the chat, thank you so much, John. Medicine wheel teachings as well for me. Thank you for adding. Real shared responsibility. Indigenous people's sovereignty needs to be recognized, respected, and implemented. So thank you all for sharing into the center and adding to our growing principles and just the expansion of ourselves in this learning and of the possibilities that we're opening up for this work. You can continue to add to those, and the visual, they can be printed out as a PDF and shared with folks who participate in this session afterwards. So just that generosity of giving and making sure that we're in good reciprocity with gifting back to all of you for your input, your wisdom, which is incredibly invaluable. Kleko chu.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks to you all. We've made it through Mentimeter poll number 2, and looks like we are getting much better, becoming seasoned veterans at using this this platform technology. So really appreciate you all participating and interacting with us. Before we shift into dialogue mode, just reflecting on some of that conversation that Kelly has offered and that you've all contributed to, principle based, of course. An example of some of that wisdom that we're so lucky to hear, and that I'm so lucky to experience, was something shared from Dr. Paulette Fox from Kainai Nation, and really what was sort of something that really came to mind when we were imagining these dialogues. She said, so matter of factly, that we don't manage species, we maintain the relationship. And so coming from that place and envisioning this kind of dialogue to support that type of an approach that recognizes that the maintenance of that sacred relationship is so important. And so helping that, of course, to inform and really kind of fits really well with all the principles that we've identified so far. So with that, we do want to shift into dialogue mode to get you all a chance to sort of start meeting each other, discussing your approaches and your perspectives on species at risk. We're going to be placing you all in small breakout groups and giving you time and space to reflect and share with one another some of the principles, of course, that have been unearthed thus far, as well as many of your experiences. So we're going to be, as I mentioned, placing you in small breakout groups to reflect. If you've identified that you'd prefer to communicate or listen in French, you'll remain in this main breakout room, and this will be considered the bilingual breakout room, if you will. And you'll have access to the interpreter, of course. If you get transferred to another breakout room by accident, you simply just have to click return to main room on your screen, and that will bring you back to the main bilingual space. Footnote to that, you will all remain in the same small groups for each of the discussion items today, and we'll bring you all back to the main room in between the questions that we'll be discussing. And there'll be about 10 to 15 minutes per breakout session, recognizing that we have so many of you wanting to create as much space and time as we can to listen and to share and to learn from one another. And what we'd like you to do while you're in your sessions, in your breakout sessions, is to begin by introducing yourselves, where you're from, and share some of your reflections on the questions that we're going to share with you as we move forward. You don't need to take, we're not asking you to take notes. we want you all to ensure that you have a chance to share first and foremost. And so with that, the first question that we're posing to you all is simply, what matters most to you right now regarding species at risk in your territory? And so with that, there will be a prompt, and you'll all be taken to your respective breakout rooms for 15 minutes to reflect, to chat on this question, and we'll bring you all back